started. I want to welcome you to the Center on National Security, to Fordham Law School. I'm glad you came out on such a cold night. I can't promise we're going to warm you up with this topic, but at least we'll do it in a way that's somewhat inspiring, or at least thoughtful. I want to begin by thanking Susan Quattrone, the Assistant Director of the Center on National Security here, for not just making sure the events happen, but for thinking of it. And as all of you are here, is testimony to it was a good idea. I want to acknowledge a few people in the audience, not by name, but I want to thank a number of our funders and donors who are in the audience. And I want to say that it's the sort of non-foundation, non-governmental money that I use for these nights. So all of the public work, as opposed to our research, our publications, et cetera, our news services, are used for the events that are for you. So thank you very much. I want to thank Georgetown University Law School. As you know, this is a joint event. The law school, the Georgetown Law School here wanted to make a point that this is a topic we're paying attention to, and something we have both institutions have been paying attention to for almost 10 years. And so this is a joint effort, and I'm not sure of the date of Georgetown's forum, but it's all part of the traveling show. I want to acknowledge the convent of the Sacred Heart School from Greenwich, Connecticut that is here tonight, and say that as much as I love the illustrious New York professional and academic community, if more high schoolers came to our events, I would be even happier. So welcome. And I want to thank our panelists. I was going through my mental chronology, my memory of the issue of torture that we're going to be dealing with tonight. And the first event that we collectively did on torture was 9 years ago. 9 years ago. And I was trying to figure out I went through the transcript of it to see what's so different about the conversation today as opposed to 9 years ago. And I think there are some differences, and that's one of the things I'd like to talk about tonight. In 2004, when the Abu Ghraib photos were released, it was really the country's first understanding of what had been done in the name of national security. There was a response that was rather potent and rather expressed some sort of anger at what had happened. But and there was denial on the part of the government. Since that time, the government has not just acknowledged, the Bush government, not just acknowledged the fact that there was an enhanced interrogation program, but they've stuck to their guns in saying that this is a program that helped us in some rather profound ways. And that's been the state of the debate. It hasn't really had any conclusion or resolution. And now we have a movie, Zero Dark 30, which basically takes the narrative line of the Bush administration that torture not just works, but that torture is essential to our national security. So essential to our national security that it brought into our custody and enabled us to kill the chief enemy that brought us 9/11. This is a very profound statement for a country to absorb. And so what we really want to do tonight is talk about what that statement means, how the American public should think about the capture of bin Laden, the use of enhanced interrogation techniques, which I call torture, and what we should do about this movie if there should be some kind of just passive acceptance, if there's some kind of counter-narrative that we can think about. And in order to help us think about it, I brought in the three people that I most respect, that have worked in this field and that have been colleagues in a very long and somewhat arduous, for different reasons for each one of them, arduous attempt to set the record straight. There have been 16 reports that have come out of the government on torture, on prisoner abuse and on torture since 9/11. I bet none of you know any of their names. They were done, they were piecemeal. Now there's a report that is purportedly more than 6,000 pages long that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has put together. No one's talking about showing it to us, but somewhere in all of this, there is a story about what had happened. But in lieu of being told what happened, these three people Ali Soufan, Jane Mayer, and Alex Gibney have tried to the best of their abilities to put together the story for you to help us understand it. I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but I trust that you understand that it's about the path to identifying the courier, Al-Quraydi, who brought us, the United States, to bin Laden and his hideout in Abbottabad. So I thought you know the biographies of these individuals. I've written them out for you. Alex Gibney is a spectacular Oscar-winning filmmaker. He made Taxi to the Dark Side, which is a fantastic film on the story of torture from its very earliest days in Afghanistan. He's always doing like 5 or 6 films at a time. I don't understand that, Alex. How do you do that? He has a film right now on the Vatican that's receiving a lot of attention. He's done a film on Lance Armstrong. He isn't afraid of tough topics, I think is what I'm trying to convey here. Jane Mayer is one of the best reporters we have if not the best, on the political scene in Washington. Somehow if Jane hits on it, we know that a year after that it's going to be a big story. She just gets there faster than anyone else because she's just a little bit smarter than everyone else. And she did that with torture, and she's done it with a number of things about the war on terror and civil liberties. And I think you'll find what she has to say today very interesting. Her book on torture is called The Dark Side. Ali Soufan, to my right, was a special agent at the FBI whose specialty was counterterrorism, who spent his years in the field, who understands as much about who the terrorists who brought us 9/11 are as anybody, and who understands what it means to try and find individuals who don't want to be found, and to understand the way in which law enforcement and those interested in intelligence function. He wrote a book called The Black Banners, which I totally recommend you read, even though some of it's redacted. It won't be redacted. Maybe we get the Senate report. Yeah. And I thought he would begin tonight.
The report won't be redacted.
It will be redacted, but getting it, it's like a book. Getting part is better than none. And besides, maybe I can redact the and I, like they did in your book. So I thought we'd begin with Ali tonight, talking about how he sees what he knows of the hunt for bin Laden and the identification of the courier, and how to think about what that hunt is all about. And I want to premise it with sort of a sort of provocative question, which is, for crying out loud, it took us 10 years to find bin Laden. And I think the American people, torture or not torture, don't understand that. Why did it take 10 years? And this film, to my mind, did not really explain it. So I'm just wondering if you can lay that out for us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming. I think that's a very loaded question. It took 10 years. I have some opinions about that. I think the enemy was definitely elusive. As we know, some of our allies were hiding our worst enemy. So that's definitely part of it. I think the enhanced interrogation techniques, as I testified in the Senate, help to recreate the Chinese wall between the FBI and the CIA. The FBI and the people who know the most about Osama bin Laden and about Al-Qaeda are actually the FBI, and especially FBI New York office, because a lot of you probably don't know, we indicted Osama bin Laden in a secret sealed indictment in the Southern District of New York in June of 1998. So a lot of these individuals were not involved anymore, especially after we walked out on the Abu Zubaydah interrogation in May of 2002. So that also contributed to this kind of thing. Another thing is, I believe, putting a lot of value and putting a lot of all our eggs in the basket of enhanced interrogation techniques and in the basket of waterboarding, basically. So if it did not come from waterboarding, it did not come from enhanced interrogation techniques, then it doesn't work. So if somebody tells us that there's a plot about something or can identify somebody, if that person wasn't waterboarded or wasn't a subject of enhanced interrogation technique, that does not mean it's the truth. And I talk about a lot of these stories in my book. I give tangible examples of what I'm talking about, specific cases that I'm talking about here. That definitely, for example, the courier. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, was waterboarded 183 times. Okay, 183 times. Talk about repeating the same thing again and again and again and expecting another result. So he was waterboarded 183 times. After that, he basically said that that guy, the Kuwaiti, the courier, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, is a nobody. He downplayed him. Abu al-Faraj al-Libi, who was the number 2 guy in Al-Qaeda at the time, also was subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques. It was so successful that he actually denied that that guy, the Kuwaiti, is important, even though he was on the map because of other investigations and other leads that we have. This is in 2003. In 2005, Hassan Ghul got picked up in Iraq. During his interrogation, before enhanced interrogation techniques, he basically said that he uses that courier, the Kuwaiti, to send information, important information to the leadership. A smart analyst down at Langley thought, okay, so why KSM and Abu al-Faraj al-Libi are lying about the Kuwaiti? Years later, right? So he must be important. So that is an indication of the successful application of waterboarding and enhanced interrogation techniques. If anyone believes that, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. This is basically what happened, because since after waterboarding, somebody says a guy is not important, that we don't need to follow that lead. So that's possibly why it took us 10 years. Now, what I think about, you want me to talk about the movie or?
Feel free.
Okay.
I'm going to get to it.
So what I think about the movie, and Karen is not going to like what I'm saying. I like the movie. I like it as entertainment. I have a problem with the first line that it's based on, first-hand account and accurate information. That is BS. Okay, that's not. And this is where the frustration is. I don't have a problem that they put torture. Torture is part of our history, that happened. However, I have a problem with the way they presented torture, and they presented waterboarding. This is a totally different story. I understand, and probably Alex can talk about that way better than me, in movies you have to create composites. You have to create characters that can carry different characters. My problem with the movie, that the composites that they created were based on real individuals. For example, at the very first minutes, you will see a torture scene. Again, that torture scene has been exaggerated, because even enhanced interrogation techniques, even in the secret jails, no one from the CIA actually tortured the way that that guy was tortured. The enhanced interrogation technique, we know how they are. They start with nudity and they end up with waterboarding, but there's no beating, there's no, there's no kicking, so that we have to keep in mind. So, but my problem is that composite character is actually a real person. This guy is Ammar al-Baluchi. He is currently in Guantanamo Bay. They say his name is Ammar. They say he's the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He's a real person. Allegedly, the information that he presented to his interrogators led us to Osama bin Laden. And the information that he presented only after he was waterboarded. I have a problem with that. For a very simple reason. Ammar al-Baluchi was not waterboarded. We only waterboarded 3 people: Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abdul Rahim al-Nashiri, and Abu Zubaydah. Unfortunately for the movie makers, Ammar al-Baluchi was not one of them. So if you want to have a composite, at least make the composite a little bit realistic. But the problem with that, they cannot claim KSM gave the information after 183 sessions of waterboarding that led to Bin Laden. They cannot claim that Abdul Rahim al-Nashri, after being subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques, at least, actually, he's probably the only guy that they went above what has been approved in enhanced interrogation techniques, as has been declassified by the government, did not give the information that led to Osama bin Laden. Abu Zubaydah, after 83 sessions of waterboarding, did not give the information that led to Osama bin Laden. So those are the three people that we waterboarded as a government. So you cannot make a character who really exists, who was not subjected to these kind of techniques, and make him the donkey in the movie, that carry you to how we get Bin Laden. I have a problem with that just because at the very beginning they say that this is based on basically accurate, real life.
First-hand accounts.
First-hand accounts. Thank you. Another thing is, I'm troubled by the movie. Again, from an entertainment factor, especially the last half
Late
an hour.
was good enough.
It's amazing. So, for a former counterterrorism FBI guy, the last half an hour was awesome. With this I told you she's not gonna like it. Another thing that I have a problem with is the idea that they are advocating, or the narrative that they are promoting. I think it's one-sided. And I think the movie, if they wanted to be accurate, if they wanted to talk about the reality of what happened in the last 10 years and the hunt of Osama bin Laden, they did not talk about the other side of the story. There was debates going on, there was arguments going on, there was fights going on, not between FBI and CIA, between the CIA themselves. As I mentioned as my statement in the Senate, and I have to say statement in the Senate because if probably I didn't say that I mentioned that, they were trying to say I divulged secret information to you. As I mentioned publicly in my statement in the Senate,
Publicly behind a screen.
yeah, at the time. I didn't have a haircut at the time, so I had to go there. So, as I mentioned, some CIA people were so frustrated with what they were seeing. One of them actually even left before me. The reason left the site, the secret site before me. The reason enhanced interrogation techniques was shelved in 2005 under the Bush administration. President Obama did not shelve enhanced interrogation techniques. President Bush did in 2005, is because so many people from the CIA came back and complained to their Attorney General, to their Inspector General about what's happening. The Inspector General initiated an investigation, and in his investigation, it's a big report, and most of it has been declassified, and you can find it on the internet. He basically said that based on everything they've seen, they cannot verify one single imminent threat was stopped because of enhanced interrogation techniques. This is not an FBI agent saying that. This is not a Department of Justice person saying that. This is a CIA Inspector General saying that. The same conclusion was in the Department of Justice report. The same conclusion was in the Military Armed Services Committee report. The same conclusion is in the Office of Professional Responsibility report. And there is a lot of other things that you can talk about these things. So this other side of the story was not mentioned. The sacrifices of other people who work in other government agencies to get to the level where we were able to identify Osama bin Laden, able to identify the Kuwaiti, able to identify the network. It was totally eliminated from the story. And I'm concerned about that. Look, a lot of people go in front of, they get embedded with the military and then they say everything that the military want them to say. And then they get embedded by the CIA and they will say only what the CIA want them to say. Or they embedded by the FBI and they do the same thing. They have this mentality. But I think you have a bigger cause, you have a bigger weight on your shoulder when you're trying to do a movie about the hunt of Osama bin Laden, about a war that cost thousands and thousands of lives. I think we have more, the government actually I don't think it is their role to promote, to sit with movie makers, to help them in order to promote one-sided, inaccurate version of what happened, while the other side of the story continue until today to be suppressed. The truth continues until today to be suppressed. I'm going to embarrass some people here, but in my book, those are the real heroes of how we get Osama bin Laden. People that, when I came to New York to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I wanted to be them. I wanted to learn from them, and I had the honor and the privilege to learn from them. People like Mike Anisov over there, people like John Anisov over there, people like Don Borelli, people like Joe Hummel, people like Bob McFadden over there. Those are, and I can say their names because I asked their permission first, and also allowed me to mention their names in the book. So those are the real heroes. Those are the people who work day and night and travel around the world, getting important information, getting important phone numbers that could have helped, that actually helped save a lot of lives, and it could have helped stop 9/11. Their sacrifices is not even mentioned in that movie. For an individual who was part of that life, who worked for many years, put my life on hold for the sake of the country, me and all the people that I mentioned and many more. When you watch that movie, you get a little bit frustrated because it is very, very one-sided, and it totally ignored the facts. And it's not the facts that any of us here are trying to promote. It is the facts that the government declassified. It is the facts that the Department of Justice declassified. It is the fact that the CIA itself declassified. It is the facts that was mentioned in the CIA Inspector General. Talk is cheap. Anybody can go and say, hey, we, like Mr. Vice President Dick Cheney, former Vice President, thank God, Dick Cheney. He said, you dunk a guy a couple of times with water, and then he's going to give you information. Well, now we know it's not a couple of times, it's 183 times, and we still didn't get the identity of what the Kuwait. They said, Padilla was arrested because of waterboarding in May of 2003. Remember, they're saying that because waterboarding started in August of 2002. Well, basically, they claimed later that it's a typo because Padilla was arrested in May of 2002, month before waterboarding. They said KSM was identified because of waterboarding. KSM identified in April of 2002, 1 month before waterboarding. So basically, everything they said so far has been proven by government investigations to be not true. So the only thing you have when you have nothing to offer is to make a movie about it. Thank you.
Go to Jane, but you better think about that. The comment you just made. Okay, so we're going to come back to you on that. So Jane, you've been in the trenches on this story for a long time, and you weren't embedded with the CIA or the FBI. You don't have a dog in the fight other than trying to find out the story. The final question I want you to ask you, whenever you say whatever you're going to say first, is why is there a sense that Americans don't know the story? The response to this movie has been somewhat welcoming. It's been nominated for awards up and down both coasts. In the first 2 weeks, it brought in $64 million. That seems like a lot of money to me. The support for torture in polls has been rising ever since the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007. The three of you and others have tried to not advocate. You're not human rights advocates. You're journalists and a documentary maker and a sort of FBI agent who decided to tell his story and to share it with people in the Senate, among other places, and in part with perhaps journalists. What's your understanding of what went wrong in telling the story so that the story that the Americans have now, the one that's most prominent in their head, is Zero Dark Group? And the lights go out.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that hard question. First, I also wanted to say that I just think this is a very unusual audience, from what I understand. We've got the special agents from the FBI, some of whom really were heroic in this period, including Ali Soufan, who left himself out of that list. And we've got some people from the Nation Institute, and then we have the Catholic Girls' School from Greenwich, Connecticut. It's not the usual coalition, but I think it's great that the subject of torture, I think, crosses over all kinds of obvious political divisions, really, and that one of the great things that really bothered me about this movie is that it doesn't understand that the real heroes in this story were the people who resisted breaking the laws and who stood up for American values and who said, we can win this war against some absolutely terrible enemies who had, were the bottom of the barrel without becoming just like them. And it meant a lot to the people in the FBI and the people in the military. It was not just liberals, but there were some great liberals too, and there were human rights lawyers. And it was a very unusual crossover, all kinds of people in America who were basically more knowledgeable about what our history was in this area and why the rule of law really is the right way to go. And so I'm just sorry that Catherine Bigelow, when she was looking for heroes, didn't actually take the time to figure out that there actually were some, and that the fights that they fought were very courageous, not just against Al-Qaeda, which they were, but also to stand up for American values and to do the right thing. And as Ali says, it wasn't just the FBI, but within the CIA there were a lot of really great people too. And there were many people whose conscience was stricken during this period, who just said, that's beneath us, not me, not now, not ever are we going to be doing that. And the thing was, it's not just about being a goody two-shoes either, and that's the other thing that's just so sad in the way that this movie portrays torture, which is, it makes it look like torture is sort of the forbidden fruit, the thing that the silver bullet, or whatever, the thing you need to do if you really want to get the bad guys. And what I discovered during the years of reporting on this subject was that the smart people who definitely want to get the bad guys understand that when you take a different approach, you win much better. You get good information. The reason we have rule of law in the country is not because we're, wimps. It's because when you actually have law and trial and sort of a scientific approach to solving these issues, rather than just hitting people over the head or dumping buckets of water on them, you get the right results. You wind up getting the right bad people. And you don't really want to have the wrong people. You want to get the right ones. And that's really what the rule of law is about. And being fair-minded about it and doing something that you can be seen doing in public and stand up proudly could be doing. So I went to this movie. I didn't know much about it. I went to a screening. My editor, David Remnick, who knew I had an interest in the subject, said, I'm not going to tell you anything, just go, tell me what you think about it after you see it. And I like a good thriller. I love John le Carré, I love all kinds of thriller movies, but I just sat there getting madder and madder, because you can see, despite the fact that the filmmakers are saying that this reflects a very difficult history, it doesn't. It distorts a very difficult history, because it leaves out so much, all the ethical, moral, and legal context in which these fights took place, and all the people like Ali Soufan who said, I'm not doing this, and the people who ran the FBI who said, we're not going to have any part of this. Catherine Bigelow, I don't know if she did this because she's ignorant of the history, or if she just, as Stephen Colbert asked her when she was being interviewed the night before last, I guess it was, asked her, were you duped? And she didn't really answer the question, but I gotta say, as a reporter, if you want to get the story, you shouldn't just talk to the authorized people. You should do some interviews with the unauthorized people, and then you'll really begin to get the facts. So why is the story that we told, that Alex told in his fantastic movie, and that Ali tells in his book, not known. You know, I think some of it is known, first of all. I'm not sure I accept the premise. I think there are an awful lot of people who understand that this was a really sad departure for American law, some of the things that happened there. But, you know, it's an easy story. It's a Hollywood story. It's this whole idea, it's like 24. If we just, you know, get tough, we're going to get the answers out of these people. And it's a feel-good story for some people in some ways. It's a revenge story. At some point in this movie, you've got the female heroine saying to the special forces, I want you to go out, I want you to kill bin Laden for me. And it's like, just as a personal favor, because he did bad things to my friends, and this is revenge. And it's a very conventional movie in some ways that falls into, you know, sort of typical police stories, and the good guys get their man in the end. And I think it's a sloppy, easy, lazy story to tell like that. And so, I mean, and that's part of the problem. And I think in some ways it's counterintuitive what we've all been saying, and it's a harder story. I mean, maybe people think torture would work. It makes you think, well, God, if they did it to me, I'd talk. But the experience in the history is that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Those shortcuts generally get you in trouble. And she didn't want to take the time to do the more complicated story, and a lot of Hollywood doesn't take the time.
Well, maybe it wasn't that she didn't want to take the time, but that she wanted to sell the movie. I mean,
Well,
the much more disturbing undercurrent here is that she had a beat on the public, what the public would accept, in the line of whatever you want to call this, a thriller, a chase. And she made the calculation. You know, I know that Colbert asked her that, but she made the calculation. She's not going to say this on national TV, I don't think, that this is what would sell, and she made the correct calculation.
That her heroine has to be the good person, not the person who's really doing something very unethical and illegal. And that, I mean, it's hard for the audience to really root for her if you feel that about her. And the truth is, it's a much more complicated role that the CIA played here. It's not such a role to be as proud of as, and she's you know, goes out on TV, as you say. I think it's an easier sell to say these were great people doing serious things that saved American lives, and that's a happier story to tell.
Of course, the underlying unhappy story in all of that, and that Ali sort of alluded to, is the sort of denigration of the Central Intelligence Agency. And to suggest that if it weren't for this young, inexperienced woman, we wouldn't have found bin Laden, which the movie suggests over and over.
Well, I mean, that also is not true. There's so many things about the movie that are distortions. I mean, the woman, first of all, the woman character is blown up way out of proportion. There was a woman that is partly, this is partly based on, but she had a male boss who was equally obsessed, and the movie suggests that, you know, it's such a typical Hollywood thing. It's her up against the world, and no one would believe her, but she has to sort of get her way because no one will listen and risk everything. And the truth is, there was not a big fight. In the movie, she's shown fighting for financial resources to do what she wants to do. The Counterterrorism Center at the CIA had a budget of $1 billion just for the Counterterrorism Center. They did not know what to do with all that money. There was not a fight for, you know, whether you could find money to finance things. It was like, what are we going to do with it? So, I mean, there are many things that are wrong with the movie in terms, if you're going to hold it to fact. I also, like Lily, find it politically slanted in many ways. And another way, that's sort of a big way that people don't talk about much, that doesn't even have to do with torture, is the portrayal of Obama. You know, the lack thereof. And I know that, I mean, it's interesting, when the word of the movie makers making this movie first came out, which was during the presidential campaign, the conservatives attacked it and said it was going to be a PR vehicle for Obama. And I read an interview with Karen Greenberg who said she cried when she was being attacked and it was so upsetting. Well, apparently it had its effect because Obama barely appears in this film except one tiny snippet from 60 Minutes where he is saying something about torture not being a good idea, and he looks like, you know, brother from another planet. He's not a heroic figure in this movie, and in fact he did make the hard calls on this thing. And you would never know. And maybe the filmmakers were too intimidated. I don't know what happened with that. But you know, I think one other thing I should say is that I think that artists have a right to make whatever version of reality they want to make it. And this, you know, she's not making my movie, and I can't complain that she's not. But I can say she shouldn't then portray it as she has, as based on real first-hand accounts and a first draft of history. It's not history, it's a distortion. And that, you know, if she came out and said, this is my fictionalized fantasy version of how we got Bin Laden, I think we wouldn't be here tonight.
Did she call you and talk to you?
No, she hasn't. I haven't heard from anybody in the movie world. And I she met with a number of CIA people because basically, if you're familiar with the territory as these guys are, you can see the stories of a number of sort of torture apologists who have spent the whole period since these things happened trying to rationalize it and justify it. And they've been a lot noisier in selling their story, to go to your original question, than the other side has been. And partly that I have to say to criticize Obama is because Obama dropped the ball. He did not want to have any kind of serious reckoning with the past here. He wanted it to go away. He didn't want to spend his political capital looking backwards on this. And so there's never been a real public accounting of this. And I think the closest we've got may be the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which has the 6,000-page report, but it hasn't been released yet. So
I like that yet.
I hope it comes out.
Yeah. Ali, did she call you? Did she talk to you about the film before she did it?
I didn't check my voicemail.
Interesting. I mean, seriously, do you think of two people who are the most authoritative on this story? You would think she didn't have to do what you said, but she might have chat. Jane referred to the typical Hollywood thing. Alex, now that's how we turn to you.
Mr. Typical Hollywood.
Yeah. In the last 10 years, in War and Terror, we've seen a tremendous rise in the use of documentaries to sort of explain in an entertaining way. You know, I mean, documentaries are so much more popular than they used to be, and so much more impactful on the public discourse and the policy world, actually. And you made this film about torture, Taxi to the Dark Side, in context a very long time ago and very early on. I presume that when you made it, you talked that you talked to people on all sides of the story and had a particular interest in people who defended the torture policy. From your point of view, what were the trade-offs she made? Because I think this is very important going forward in choosing not to make a documentary, or even a documentary-like film, more like Kurt Lochner. What are the trade-offs that she made, and how do you assess where this film misled the American people, unless you want to say that it didn't?
Well, first of all, I mean, both Jane and Ali have been so articulate and thorough on this subject that I'm not sure there's much left for me to say, except how much I liked Catherine Bigelow's Point Break with Patrick Swayze and It really was a terrific film. Particularly that last scene with the big waves in Perth. Well, I'm told that was actually in Oregon, and the people from Australia get very upset about it. And where she started to go wrong in terms of being fiction. But I actually take a much more charitable view of Catherine Bigelow and her filmmaking in this. Like Ali, I confess to liking the film. And actually there's a lot about it at the beginning of the film, you know, I really like. Particularly the cut from the screams of 9/11 to a scene of torture, which to me was a kind of cinematic way of saying this was about revenge. It was not smart, it was about revenge. And I actually thought that was a rather tough-minded way of treating this issue initially. So in the first 10 minutes of the film, I was like, whoa, this is going to be pretty interesting. And frankly, also, there's a lot about the film that's rather unconventional. You know, we talk about the typical heroine. I actually don't see Maya the way she was portrayed as a typical heroine. You know, she doesn't have what we would call, where was her standard love interest? You know, that was missing. Maybe she had tortured him to death, I don't know. But she seemed at times to be a rather morally ambiguous character, which I found also interesting. And stylistically, you know, there's a lot to like about it. Frankly, you know, I think some of the blame here, you know, we've all become victims of the auteur theory, so Catherine Bigelow must be at fault. Frankly, I think some of the blame here has to fall on Mark Boal, who is, after all, a journalist, or was a journalist, and was part of his filmmaking team. And so, you know, there were a lot of choices made here in terms of the structure of the narrative that I think are very interesting. The two biggest issues that I have with the film, and I don't see, and I don't think in following that they would have had any, it would have been any less dramatic. One is what was left out. I mean, and Jane talked about this a little bit, but really it's rather shocking. I mean, you know, the structure of the narrative clearly shows, and luckily, you know, and I got some pushback from this because, you know, I'm a member of the Academy, and so when I wrote a piece about this on Huffington Post, I was accused of running an Oscar campaign against the film. But I had a DVD. So I was able to look through it very carefully and trace the torture narrative in the film. And it's just unambiguous. You know, every step along the way, everything that's said is a conversation in Washington, D.C., where it's like, oh man, we surely would have gotten bin Laden by now if they'd just not stopped the program. You know, when Jane mentions when Obama comes on TV and starts saying, you know, torture, we don't want to do torture, it's not who we are, it's not part of our values, you know, the grizzled CIA agent in the foreground just shakes her head. Like, you know, obviously, like, what a wimp, referring to Obama. So it's quite clear, and then the whole line of Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti is clear that the key element that they get is gotten through torture. So, and all the interrogations that Maya watches, they're all torture interrogations. People are being beat up, slapped around, all of that. What was missing was any sense of perspective. Where were the other CIA agents who were appalled? Where were the FBI agents who were appalled? Or even more important, where were the horrible mistakes that were made as a result of false information we got from torture? Now, none of this would have made the narrative any less dramatic. I think it would have made it more dramatic. Because I don't see that there's anything wrong with having a character, even a main character, who is not deeply sympathetic or is not wholly good. I mean, you know, Raging Bull is one of my favorite movies. You know, you have to say that Jake LaMotta is not Mr. Cuddly. But I think it was that total lack of perspective. So, you know, after all, we went to the war in Iraq partially because of false information obtained through torture. And this is after the CIA plucked a guy out of the FBI's hands and sent him to Egypt to be tortured under, theoretically, CIA supervision. So, and the CIA later admitted that he had given false information about the connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. How could that have been missing from this narrative? The other thing that I object to as a filmmaker is something that's happening more and more, which is, you know, you have to give a lot of credit to the PR division of what I would call the wing of the CIA that I would call CYA-CIA. And these are the people who are defending the torture narrative, people like Jose Rodriguez, the guy. It's hard for me to understand how he can be a credible defender of the torture narrative when he's the guy who destroyed the videotapes of waterboarding. Now, but somehow he still seems to be going forward. He was the guy who did criticize the accuracy of the movie. In a piece in the Washington Post, he said, actually, we didn't use such big bottles of the waterboarding, we used slightly smaller bottles. But the closeness of this branch of the CIA to the filmmakers, and also in a peculiar way, and some of this correspondence is posted online. A lot of the people in the CIA were big fans, including Mike Hayden, of, you know, he was not in the CIA when these guys were coming in, but they were obviously big fans of the filmmakers because of Hurt Locker and somewhat starstruck. But I also think it's a little bit scary when parts of the US government are picking and choosing certain filmmakers with whom to cooperate on projects with what is allegedly public information. And that's going to lead us down the rabbit hole very quickly. So that, I think, is a big concern. I suspect that, I don't think there was a malevolent desire to do a film and say, okay, well, we're going to pitch it this way because it's going to make more money. I think they got involved with a couple of people who brought them inside, and they felt, well, these people are tough, and they're telling us the right story, so we're going to go with that. But as Jane said, they didn't check. They might have done a little checking. I know they were in a hurry, but they might have done a little checking. So I feel in the main, those are the two issues I had with the film. One was this, that I think they were captured by a certain portion of the CIA that had an agenda to sell, and then they got seduced by the access they got, and they helped to sell it. And two, they left out any of the larger perspective, not only the perspective about how much it cost us in the hunt for bin Laden, in terms of how much more time it cost us, likely because we so utterly believed in enhanced interrogation techniques, but also the larger cost in terms of, they make it look like a technique, and I think that, in another way, that was the biggest loss of the film. Torture, when you start talking about torture, it's not just a technique. It represents, as Jane says, the abrogation of the rule of law. It represents the abrogation of our fundamental values, allegedly what we were fighting the war on terror for. And after all, part of Osama bin Laden's agenda was to get us to look like hypocrites, to make us behave in a way that that showed to the world that we didn't really believe in our democratic values. You would have thought in a film about this fundamental issue that they could have reckoned with that. So that was my issue from the film.
But there's another piece of that, which is that somehow in not having one person in the film push back at any moment, there was no dissent on any level.
That's correct.
And so by not having that, somehow there seemed to be less sympathy for the victims of the torture. So I was thinking about your film, Taxi to the Dark Side, where you really feel for that guy who's beaten to death, and there's a and we don't even know that much about him.
Well, if I could just interject about that, one of the things, just as an aside, one of the things about Taxi to the Dark Side that was so difficult for us in the cutting room was that we always felt tremendous sympathy for the guy who was murdered. He was murdered, and when I say murder, the Army was the one who classified it as a homicide. He was murdered in Bagram Air Force Base. But I also, in interviewing the people who killed him, I came to have tremendous sympathy for them, actually, and liked them quite a lot. And at some point in the film, we realized, particularly when viewers looked at it, that we had gone too far in sympathizing with the guards, and actually had to put back some details to show how brutal they had been with this prisoner. But in so doing, we were creating this environment where you never lost a sense of humanity for people on either side. And that was terribly important.
Right, and I sort of felt there wasn't a lot of humanity for anyone. There was not emotion in this movie, except for the 9/11 scene, which is actually the emotion in the film, is that tape of people perishing at the Trade Center.
No, I agree. It's interesting. I don't think, even though they showed somebody being tortured and forced into a box, a containment box, and you don't see it as he sees it. You don't feel what he feels. It's not. It's strangely antiseptic from his standpoint. It's not an empathetic movie, really.
And actually, that's the part that I found most disturbing.
You also, Alex has made this documentary about one of the detainees who was beaten to death, and there were, and Jose Rodriguez, who wrote this piece in Washington Post, who was at the CIA overseeing this program, said, oh, it was all authorized, it was all fine. But he didn't mention that there were people who died. It wasn't all so carefully authorized. There were people who, there were people, somebody who I wrote about in the New Yorker who was literally died, and they said he was crucified. He was hung up by his arms and he couldn't breathe, and while he was being interrogated by the CIA in Iraq. And things went wrong. People were left out overnight and died of the cold. I mean, you know, and you have no sense of how horrible it could be in this movie. And she doesn't want to really deal with that, I don't think, or she or Mark Hall, or maybe it's not a very good way maybe to get ticket sales. And I know that's cynical to say that this is a commercial concern, but you know, I think it is probably a concern. It would have been a tough movie for Hollywood to get behind if they did the real movie.
I guess. I mean, I take the politest exception to the depiction of the torture. I thought it was an amalgamation too. I didn't feel it was pleasant. It was directed in a rather different way than, say, the scenes in 24, which were far more, you know, high octane. My issue had more to do with any lack of perspective. They just presented it in a thoroughgoing way that it had to be done, or you wouldn't get the information. And that, to me, was the most appalling thing, since it's just palpably untrue.
I have a factual question that's always sort of bothered me about this torture. I mean, I know it's illegal, I know it's immoral, I know it dehumanizes, I know I get all that. But the question I'd like Ali to start with answering this, and Jane, you might have a sense of it too, is to what extent does putting energy into torture as a way of getting information, do you think, take away from doing intelligence work the right way? If you know that you have in your basket of goods torture, and you believe it's going to get you good information, isn't it just easier to go that way? And how do you think that plays out?
I think I have to put the answer in a little bit of context. I mean, enhanced interrogation techniques, again, it starts with nudity, it goes through about 12 other steps, and it ends up with everybody. This whole program, if you look at it, is nothing compared to what these individuals are expecting to be treated in some Middle Eastern jails, for example. This is like a welcoming, let's have tea, you know, in an Egyptian jail under Mubarak, for example. So we went through on a path that less than halfway on that path, because of a lot of legal constraints and so forth, we're gonna hit a glass ceiling. And the glass ceiling is waterboarding. So when you hit the glass ceiling, what do? You keep repeating the last technique again and again and again, which is waterboarding. And unfortunately, when you keep repeating it again and again and again, the detainee already called your bluff. So you actually limited a lot of your options during an interrogation. This is number one. Number two, everything that I've heard, everything, from the president's speech in 2006 to all the claims of people who were not involved, like, for example, with all due respect to General Hayden or Judge McCasey, those individuals took the CIA and the Department of Justice, respectively, after the program has been shelved. So they don't have first-hand information. A lot of these guys who are promoting enhanced interrogation techniques publicly, the biggest threat they had in fighting terrorism is having a paper cut when they read a cable back in Washington, D.C. I mean, those guys are bureaucrats in Washington. Let's be frank about it. I was there. I saw it firsthand. All the information that we got was not because of torture. One of the best interrogations, and it is called, I think, by Congress, I think a senator mentioned it, as the best interrogation in the war on terror. Okay, it happened immediately after 9/11, where bin Laden's personal bodyguard identified the hijackers as Qaeda operatives. He gave us a significant amount of information that was instrumental in planning for the war in Afghanistan. I did that interrogation with my partner, Bob McFadden, over there from NCIS. You guys are going to be shocked. The most important interrogation in the war on terror, we read the freaking guy his Miranda rights every time we talked to him. Okay? They can talk. They can say, again, talk is cheap. But I challenge any of these guys to go in front of Congress like I did, raise their right hand, take an oath, and say the truth. They won't. Because if they want to do that, they will end up in jail. So, Again, talk is cheap. So definitely it limits you. And I am not aware of any success. They claimed KSM was identified because of waterboarding. Wrong. I was there. They claimed Padilla was identified because of waterboarding. Wrong. I was there. They claimed 9/11. We knew the details about it because of waterboarding. Wrong. I was there. It wasn't because of waterboarding. I am still waiting for them to tell me one single thing that can shut me up. One life that was saved because of waterboarding. I don't see it. Maybe it's there. I am not against waterboarding. I'm not against enhanced interrogation techniques. And I can tell you because that's what I believe. Based on I'm not against it because of morality. Okay, the enemy is a tough enemy. And I'm sorry, I don't feel sorry for these guys. I mean, I'll be talking with a guy, we disrupt an operation, we catch an individual, and that happened more than once. Okay, I'm giving him tea, giving him cookies, talking to him. And then he tells me, if I catch you outside, I slit your throat in a second and I'll videotape it. These guys are evil individuals. But my job is to save lives in the best way I can, and my job is to be sure that these guys will never see the light of day again. And that is not by putting them for 10 years without prosecutions in a Guantanamo Bay, because we messed up that thing so much that we cannot prosecute these guys even in a military commission. For what? For nothing. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the worst mastermind, the worst killer in the 21st century. 10 years he has been in jail in Guantanamo. What did we do about it? What is our end game? Can we prosecute him? Can we bring justice to the 3,000 people who were killed? No. Why? Because some idiot wanted to waterboard him 183 times. And that individual was not a CIA officer. They portray in the movie CIA officers were doing that. It was not the CIA officers who did that. It was contractors who were hired from outside. It was Dumb and Dumber who were hired from outside who did that. And those individuals have no idea about interrogations, never interrogated a guy in their own life. They have no idea about Islamic extremists. They have no idea about the ideology of these guys. They have no idea that you're dealing with an individual who's trying, who would in a second blow himself up for the sake of his cause. So you think by taking his underwear, he's going to be, oh, please give me my underwear back, I'll tell you everything. So I don't know, I still, until today, I don't know why we did that program. Thank God it was a short-lived program. Thank God it only lasted about less than 3 years, and then it was shelved. And the reason it was shelved, as the CIA Inspector General said, that they could not prove that one single imminent threat was stopped because of enhanced interrogation techniques and waterboarding. Not one single imminent threat. That's not an FBI agent who's saying that, that's the CIA's own Inspector General after a detailed investigation. So, those individuals can say whatever they want to say, but the facts and history is not on their side.
Which brings us to the issue of accountability. You said, you know, it would have been a very different film. Eugene said it would have been a very different film if the United States had come to some kind of reckoning with this issue. I'm wondering what that reckoning now would look like. Just pretend. I mean, I know that the president and his team have said from the very beginning, they've been very forthright about it, we're not going down that path, we're going to move forward, we're not going to move backward. But without an accountability moment, things like, you know, you put in the past tense, they claimed that this information was important. It's not that they claimed it, they still claim it. Still, Zubaydah's testimony, his torture is considered to have been important, not his interrogation by the FBI.
You notice nobody talk about Abu Zubaydah anymore?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll tell you why nobody talk about Abu Zubaydah anymore, because I actually told the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence that an FBI agent always keeps his nose, or her nose. They destroyed 93 tapes, thinking the truth is destroyed. You didn't know that detailed notes about everything that we got from Abu Zubaydah is locked in the New York office of the FBI. So the facts are out there. Nobody is talking about Abu Zubaydah anymore.
So the question is, how would the country, does it still matter to have the accountability moment, Jane?
I think it matters a ton. I mean, I think it's about us understanding our own history, and I think it's incredibly important because if the facts don't get completely known and understood, then it's going to be like this where anybody can write their own version of history. So I think that it's still very important. And so I've got high hopes, as I said, for the Senate Committee's report to lay this down. And there are a couple other groups that are trying to also put together history. I think the Constitution Project is trying to do that.
But is telling the story the same thing as accountability?
Well, I mean, people sometimes say, shouldn't these people who ran the CIA program go to jail? And didn't they commit war crimes? And I think that, personally, this is where I think that the most important thing from my standpoint is getting the facts. Maybe it's because I'm a reporter, but I think if you start prosecuting people who were involved in this program, you can't stop if you want to really take a look at it until you went right up to the White House. And nobody's going to be prosecuting the former president over this. So it's in some ways not fair to prosecute even the lower down people, I think. Not everyone agrees with me. That's my... I'm much more interested in our learning from it and getting the facts straight so that we don't do it again. And it was interesting to me in the 2008 presidential election, both the Republican nominee John McCain and the Democrat Barack Obama agreed torture is wrong, Guantanamo should be closed. This was a terrible mistake. We went down the wrong road on this. And since that time, as you mentioned, the polls show that there's been a lot of what I regard lost ground on this issue. There's more support for torture now. There's much more support for keeping Guantanamo open. And I think that's the consequence of not having the history known and made clear, and not having this White House stand up and try to at least get the history out. So I'm sorry they let it slide and swept it under the rug.
Alex, as a person who, can you mention this question? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, I mean, I just had a slight follow-up on that. I mean, I do think that, I mean, Ali talked about justice, and I do think justice is important. And I do regret, I generally agree with Jane that the most important thing is having the facts. But I do think, unless there's a sense of accountability, then, history does tend to repeat itself. And so, I do regret that we didn't have some kind of, and it could have been a non-partisan special prosecutor, or even a non-partisan investigator.
Well, they did have one, and then they didn't bring any charges. I have to say, if I were to go after anyone in this program, I would be going after those contractors. And they were the people who pretended they knew what they were doing when they didn't. That, and maybe the other people who I found particularly egregious were the medical people involved in this program who gave up their sort of oath to first do no harm, and instead while people were being waterboarded, the oxygen level in their blood was being measured by medical people to make sure that they were in pain but not dying. And that was pretty hard to take. But anyway, I just don't know whether you get moved forward by prosecuting them at this point. I don't. Maybe you do. I don't know. I think it's a hard question.
The one thing though about the movies, if you let me indulge myself for this one thing, is that I do think that in terms of taking a look at why support for torture seems to be rising, one thing you can say about the power of Hollywood is that image makers have managed somehow to take something that is utterly irrational and make us believe it because of the power of emotion. It's obviously not tough to torture somebody, to beat somebody up or waterboard somebody who's utterly helpless and chained before you. And we know from Ali Soufan and many others that it's not smart to do it because you get bad information. Yet somehow, through the power of imagery, And it feels smart because it feels like revenge. It feels like, yeah, man, we're kicking ass. And yet, we're not. We're doing just the opposite. We're kicking ourselves. But that is where, and that is why I think there is a value in discussing films like Zero Dark 30, because the power of images is so strong in terms of stirring our emotions. And of course, the emotions over this issue are particularly strong.
Well, you want to comment on the accountability issue?
I am against prosecution. I'm against prosecution of CIA individuals who are following orders given to them by people in Washington, regardless if they should have known better or not. I am all for turning the page and moving forward. However, I am also for allowing the other point of story to be unredacted. So it's not only people who can say waterboarding work can say and write whatever they want, and people who says it does not work, they are heavily censored. So I think as a nation, we need to look backward on what happened in the last 10 years. We need to face that important period of our history. And also, we need to tell the American people the truth, regardless if we can hurt the feelings of some people in Washington who manufactured this ill-thought program.
And yet,
I was just going to say, to show why the history is really important, why we really need the facts. We were just talking beforehand about, well, how did they really get the name of the courier that led to bin Laden? And Alex and I have been both doing some reporting to try to figure out, well, what is the real story, and who talked, and under what circumstances? And we have a complete contradiction because we've talked to different people. The people who I've talked to, and the Associated Press version of the story that's appeared someplace, says that one of the most important sources in getting the courier's name was this detainee Hassan Gul, who was picked up in I think January 2004 in Iraq. And the version that I was told by people who purport to know was contrary to the movie version. He divulged important information about the courier before he was tortured. Then when they tortured him, he didn't say anything more, he didn't add anything to it. But so he talked before he was coerced. And then he was held by the CIA for 2.5 more years in black site. But you heard the opposite, right? And here we have people who want to be able to figure out what the truth is about our country's history, and we have. You heard that he spoke when he was tortured, right? What was your
Kurds.
By the Kurds.
By the Kurds with the CIA in the room. Now, and the only way to figure out what the truth is to get the record declassified.
and the reason they don't want to declassify it is the threat of prosecution. I mean, that is part of what's going on. If you know what happened, it's going to be hard to have that record out there and not prosecute people.
Now, let me ask you a question, Karen. We're here at the Fordham School of Law. One person in particular that I'm curious about is Jose Rodriguez himself. How is it that he could destroy those videotapes of interrogation, which could possibly be evidence of a crime, and not be prosecuted?
Because he's part of this story. And in this story, if you're John Kiriakou and you talk about torture, and it's considered a leak or whistleblowing, and if you're Jose Rodriguez and you come out and basically reiterate the narrative that the government has been giving, you're going to be either prosecuted in the first instance or not prosecuted, because the story has to be that we can't prosecute people for torture. That has been the decision from the bottom to the top of our government. And contrary to the three of you, let me just put this on the record, I actually think prosecutions are extremely important, and not because of vengeance, because, we all could pick our favorite who we want prosecuted, But I want to reiterate something Ali said. There are a lot of people out there now, with or without this movie, who are prominent people in law enforcement elsewhere, who say that we found out about bin Laden, about Zubaydah, about Khadija, about et cetera, all this information from torture. And unless A, the record is set straight, perhaps by the Senate report, or people are prosecuted, then who's to say it won't happen again? Don't kid yourselves. And there's a lot of wars we're going to be fighting. We're still fighting a lot of wars. And so I know that George Bush ended this program, and I know that Obama has outlawed torture or had an executive order against torture. But I'm not so comforted about the security of this going forward. And I'm not so comfortable about our ability to correctly identify our enemies. So as a symbolic measure, not as a vengeful measure to X, Y, or Z, I actually think it could be very important, but I just wanted to say that. I have one more question, but first we're going to open this up to you guys so that you have some time to talk. So there are 2 microphones. Don't speak without a microphone. Just wait. Put up your hand if you want to ask the question, and I'll call on you. You guys ready with the microphone? Yeah. Guy with the yellow tie.
Hello. I'm a lawyer and a pacifist in New York City. I'm interested in whether you, Ms. Greenberg, feel there is a cogent and worth listening to argument that would disagree with you as to the use of torture, and whether there was a reason not to include it in tonight's program, which would, of course, have generated a very different type of program tonight.
Yeah, and I totally take that. And I was going to actually play that role, and we never got that far. And I think one of the reasons is that I'm assuming that we know that narrative, but if you'd like to hear it, I'm happy to give it to you, which is that I think Ali actually said it very well. We're up against an extremely tough enemy that means us no good. We needed information, particularly in the early years after 9/11. There was a sense that we needed to do everything we could to find out who attacked us, how they attacked us, and what further attacks they wanted to have against the country. And the decision was made that the law needed to be changed and amended so that these techniques were possible. The problem with that, right? So
That's all they got.
that's what?
That's all they've got.
Right. But that is the, right? And I think that's what you would have heard. I wasn't really interested in having a debate about torture, which we've done many panels on, but a debate on how the American public is being educated about what was done. So that's kind of the answer.
I mean, and to voice the other side of the debate to some extent, I mean, there are plenty of very smart people who've seen this movie who felt that it was anti-torture in some ways, or that it was much more complicated. There have been people like Andrew Sullivan, who was going to be here tonight, but he was sick. That's one of the problems. But he felt that the movie took a step towards showing that there was a real torture program, which the Bush administration had said it was just a matter of a couple, rotten apples at the bottom of the barrel. So he thought that was a real contribution of the movie. And just to be the devil's advocate for the movie for a minute, it's not so obvious that it doesn't necessarily, it's not like 24, the TV show. It doesn't have someone just immediately under pain saying, Bin Laden is in Abbottabad and you must go get him. It's more complicated than that. And they do show a variety of ways that people get intelligence. And as Alex says, it's not just simply triumphal. It's a little more subtle and complicated than that. And in the end, it doesn't end with people waving the flag and doing a 21-gun salute. It ends with the heroine crying, which is a kind of ambiguous cry. You can't tell if she's crying out of relief or guilt or just lack of knowing what happens next in your life. But I mean, it's not just black and white, really. But my fear is that the takeaway for most people who don't know the history at all here is going to be, well, we had to do what we had to do, and that was torture people. And that's how it starts with torture and it ends with finding Bin Laden. And there's nothing that questions that process along the way.
More questions. Here in the second row.
I'm from the Catholic Law School. My question the section of the movie titled Human Error, do you think it satirizes the torture scenes because it does disprove some of the information received in the torture scenes?
Could you repeat the question?
The section of the movie titled Human Error, because it goes along the scenes, do you think it almost satirizes the torture scenes because it does disprove some of the information received through the torture?
That is a really good question. I'll tell you what I think, and then Jane can say what she thinks. But the question is really, do you think that because the torture isn't seen to work, actually, in all of this 40-plus minutes of torture, is there a way in which, and is titled Human Error, is there a way in which that's its own kind of commentary that may not come into the narrative of the film, but that comes there in the way she put it together in the structure? Interesting, I just want to say that she has not said this. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone twice now to see the movie, and as Alex says, I think there's so many ways that it tells the story the torture works, and as Ali noticed too, I mean, it's slanted in many ways. It's not just the first scene, but there are other scenes. There's a later detainee who says, "I'll tell you everything I know because I was tortured before in Israel and I don't want to be sent back again." So the implicit message is that brutalization is making him cooperate, and the threat of it's making him cooperate. And then again, as Alex said, there's a discussion in Washington where people are saying, we'll never get anything again because those detainees have all got lawyers now. And so the idea is that if you actually use a process that includes due process and lawyers, you'll never get to the bottom of a crime, which is sort of a sad situation since that's how the entire United States justice system
Law school. I think maybe, in the back here.
I am Dr. Alan Keller. I direct the Bellevue NYU program for survivors of torture. My colleague, Dr. Kate Porterfield, is a psychologist. So it's two people who spend their days caring for torture victims. First of all, I just want to thank you. To me, the four of you are among my heroes. And part of that is because I am terrified for the individuals I care for. You know, the peaceful African student activist, the Tibetan monk, the individual persecuted because of their sexual orientation. We've made it so much easier for them to get tortured. And from a health perspective, there were a lot of things that movie got wrong. Number one, it doesn't begin to show how awful the health consequences are. And I don't feel sentimental about the terrorists. Nobody should be tortured. But most people who are in these facilities were released with never being charged. And Kate and I know, having examined former and current detainees, these are among the most damaged individuals I've ever seen. And it wasn't the waterboarding. That's not the worst. It was the humiliations. That was when people told me that was when they completely came undone. So number one, that. Number two, what Jane said, that it was doctors who led the parade on sanitizing this and promoted the lie that it was safe and it was effective. So I think there's a few things we can do. I always try to think, what can we do? So here are my humble prescriptions. Number one, on the video you're watching, at the beginning, I saw that frame where they said based on a true story. At the last frame, if I'm not mistaken, because it was a lot quicker, it said some of the characters have been fictionalized and the usual disclaimer. Now, I was the only one sitting in the theater because I had a teacher at college who taught film and said if you leave before the credits, you fail. But I'd encourage you to look at that last frame. Maybe we can get, if nothing else, maybe we can get her to put that frame first. Frame, that would be number one. Number two, there's legislation in New York which says if you're a doctor who participates in torture, you can lose your license. And I hope all of you will write your state assembly and senators, especially the Republican ones. And then I think number three, we do need to make sure the truth gets out, and that this report is released. And I think they don't want to release it because it's going to make us look so bad. So my question after that for each of you, my heroes, is how comfortable are you that we're not going to do this again? And what can we do to make sure it doesn't? Because at the end of the day, that to me is the most important thing.
What could we, that we're not going back? I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with going back. I was, you know, everybody always asks you, you know, when you make a movie, particularly if it's about something grim, it's like, oh, well, that was pretty grim, but now what? And I do think that's the big question before us, and that's why we were raising this question of accountability and justice and so forth. You know, I don't have a good answer, but I was trying to brainstorm here with Jane, so I'll put the question to Karen to see if she thinks it's a good idea. What if we, I mean, what if we were able, if we could wave our magic wand and we were able to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but under oath, and then if people were proven to be lying, then they would go to prison. They would be tried for perjury. How would that work?
In the best of all possible worlds, it wouldn't be my first choice, but in the real world, I think it would be a very viable way to go about it. Do you think it could happen?
I don't know. Seems accomplishable.
Yeah. For the, what? It's unconstitutional. So are the military commission. Oh, sorry. Are you comfortable that we're not going to go through with hiring contractors to torture people in the name of national security in the future?
I think under President Obama we won't do it, but if there's another president and a terrorist attack that happens, absolutely. They will actually do it and they make it the law and they probably add an amendment to the Constitution. It's okay to work with people. So.
One of the two contractors who was hired, who was involved in this program, just became a bishop of the Mormon Church. I mean, so a lot of accountability.
I cannot comment on that. I was involved and I know some of these individuals, so I cannot comment on it. But no, to be honest with you, no, I'm not comfortable that that won't happen again because unfortunately that issue became a partisan issue, that issue became a political issue. There is a very divided capital we have today. Waterboarding is, and torture is basically part of that narrative, even part of the political agenda, as we saw from the debates, the presidential debates. So I believe that people are not apologizing for that because most of the American people don't know the truth. Now, if you want to take time and ask Google, Google can tell you the truth. You know, a lot of these reports that we were talking about are out there. You see how dates have been doctored. You see how for example, they said Padilla was picked up in May of '03, even though he was picked up in May of '02. You see how they say that Benishir was picked up in December of 2002, even though, you know, he was picked up in September 11 of 2002, and that's an operation that I was personally involved in. So changing dates, making new kind of timeline, then having it so highly classified and briefing it to people who, like Casey or Hayden, these guys are going to believe it. So they are reading stuff and they are believing it. However, if you take some time to check the facts, you will see that these facts were all wrong. Another thing about this, and this is also available in public, that these kind of allegations about the efficacy became kind of gospel for individuals and nobody, for the proponents of enhanced interrogation techniques. And nobody, not even the media, and this is part of the media's problem, are questioning these individuals about this. The Office of Professional Responsibility report, the OPR report from the Department of Justice on the Office of the Legal Counsel memos, were the closest entity to actually do some investigation into this. They asked Stephen Bradbury, who's an author of one of the memos, why didn't you check the facts regarding these dates that I mentioned? And his response was, shockingly, my job is not to investigate facts. My job is to provide opinion. They said, no, your job is to investigate facts. If this is the only fact you're using to provide your legal opinion. So these things are out, these things public. But unfortunately, I am really shocked that you don't have people putting it together to the American people in a way that people can read it or see it on television and understand it. Unfortunately, when this situation happens, when these things are happening today, I am not confident at all that we won't do worse down in the future if something like 9/11 happened again.
Right here. Did you? Yeah, right here.
You mentioned the thing about the contractors, and I just wanted to make the following point. If I were in the business of hiring people, and I was going to run a prison in Baghdad, I'd look around for the dopiest one-star general that I could find, and I'd fill the prison with West Virginia prison guards. So it's who picks these people? The same thing, since I'm looking to set up a terrorist, anti-terrorist group, I'm not going to be able to hire the four of you. Because the four of you are not going to do what I think I would like you to do, nor would I hire the doctor in the back. So I think more attention has to be paid to this business of who's hiring these people, rather than just saying, well, they're just the contractors. They were selectively picked because the people who did the picking knew what they were going to get out of it. So that's the point I wanted to make.
I just have a funny story to tell you. Not so funny, actually. To your point, it just shows how naive some of us were at the beginning of this. I asked a rather high-ranking Pentagon official, God, that guy at Abu Ghraib, I mean, if you just look a little bit into his past, you see that he was, fired for beating prisoners in this prison in the Midwest. And this guy looked at me straight in the face and he goes, boy, are you naive. That's why we hired him. It's like, it takes a while to get there. Read Jane's book. Jane's book.
I mean, at the CIA, I think the thing is you have to go back and remember what the mindset was. And I think rather than it being all a matter of sort of pure evil and calculation, a lot of it was panic and amateurism. The CIA, it was not in the interrogation business, despite what people think, and it's really the FBI that does a lot more interrogation, and so does the military. And they really didn't know what they were doing, and so they hired what I regard as a couple of quacks who were psychologists who claimed that experiments that had been done on dogs would work on people too. And that they needed, there's a line in the movie that uses one of their lines. It's about this theory of you have to get learned helplessness. They need the detainees to learn that they can't do anything for themselves. They have no power over their own existence, and that only then will they comply completely with their masters and tell the truth or whatever. And it worked on dogs, so of course it'll work on people. And so, I mean, it's the sheer quackery of it was one of the things that I thought was mind-boggling. I mean, and it wasn't just at the CIA. I mean, they also did these, all those crazy things they did down in Guantanamo with people, including, I remember, they were bombarding people with music constantly to try to make them just sort of lose their minds. And one of the things that I remember we argued about at the New Yorker about whether or not to put it in, because it was vaguely humorous, and I thought we should put it in anyway, but it sort of destroyed the mood. But they did a study on what was the music that made people lose their minds the most and the quickest. And there were two things. One, the sound of human babies crying, which is not surprising, but the other was Yoko Ono singing. Program is this, so.
They should add that they also tried the Barney song, which is apparently very effective. And for anybody interested in the utter lunacy of this, because these techniques migrated rather quickly, you can read the interrogation logs of Muhammad al-Qahtani, and that is really a jaw-dropper. If you have an hour some afternoon to see all the loony stuff they did with poor Muhammad al-Qahtani.
I know you have a lot of questions, but we always end on time. So, this whole 10 years has been a little bit difficult, but the really nice part of it, at least for some of us, has been getting to know one another and find a lot of you in the audience and ourselves to try to make it be different in the future. So thank our panelists and thank you.